In this video, I'm going to compare 7 different colors of blue oil paint. I feel like as artists, we have the most choice when it comes to the color blue, and most of us gravitate to 1 or 2 of them as our default. For example, my default is French Ultramarine Blue, and the purpose of doing this is to see if we are inspired to add another blue to our palette or swap a blue out with one that we're already using. One thing that I want to point out really quickly before we get started is that all of these paints have a light fastness rating of 1, which is the highest rating and means that a color won't fade as much when exposed to the light. And second, these pigments all have a AA or single A permanence rating, which relates to the chemical stability of the paint, kind of like light fastness. Cerulean Blue and Cobalt Blue both have the AA permanence rating. The others are all single A. Cobalt Blue and Cerulean Blue are also twice as expensive as all of the other colors. So here is my color study with the different colors of blue. I just used an 8x10 piece of gesso board for the background, and I used titanium white to tint each color. If we zoom in here, the first one is Cerulean Blue. Cerulean Blue uses the pigment PB35. PB just stands for Pigment Blue. This paint is categorized as semi-opaque, but it's more transparent in my opinion. I'd say it has weaker tinting strength and loses its intensity pretty quickly as white is added. As I was making this, I felt like it might be good for conveying atmospheric perspective, say if you're painting a landscape. Next up is Manganese Blue Hue, and I'm not sure this video conveys how electric this color really is. So it uses PB15 as its pigment and also PG7, and this is a color that uses PG7, so that's Pigment Green, and it's like this nice bright green, and this is already a color that I use regularly. So as you can see, hopefully, this color is a really vivid blue, and it kind of reminds me of Caribbean water. That was the first thing that came to mind, but also maybe in here some shadows and ice or snow that you might sometimes see. Here we have Cobalt Blue, which uses the pigment PB28. So this paint is categorized as semi-transparent. You can kind of see the brush strokes here in the first box. So it becomes opaque quickly when white is added. I'd say this is a really classic true blue and kind of a middle ground between French Ultramarine and Cerulean Blue. It's not too green, not too purple. Now we have French Ultramarine Blue, which uses the pigment PB29. So this is the synthetic version of the original Ultramarine Blue, which was made of lapis lazuli. You could actually still buy that from Michael Harding. It's just very expensive. Anyways, here is the Ultramarine. You can see that it's a transparent blue. Even though it's deep, there is some patchiness here in the first box. This paint does get opaque very quickly, even with just a little bit of white added. Something that surprised me as I was filling in these boxes was how purple the Ultramarine actually looks next to the other blues. It's almost a periwinkle as you get into the lighter shades. I don't know about you, but I always wondered what the heck is the difference between Winsor Blue Green Shade and Winsor Blue Red Shade. But there is a subtle difference. So both of these paints use the pigment PB15, and most paints that use this pigment call this blue Phthalo Blue. But as you can see here, the red shade almost looks like a more intense cerulean blue, whereas the green shade almost looks like a manganese blue hue, just more intense and more opaque. So both of the Winsor Blue shades have really high tinting strength. It took me a lot of white to tone them down, and while they both started out transparent, they quickly became opaque with the addition of so much white. So perhaps if you're intrigued by the Cerulean Blue or the Manganese Blue and you're looking for more opacity, you might test out one of the Winsor Blue hues. Last up is Prussian Blue. So Prussian Blue uses the pigment PB27. It's categorized as transparent, although it's so deep you almost can't tell. I really like this color. It feels like a vintage navy blue, and it maintains its richness even as white is added. So it has really high tinting strength. So that's it. These are all 7 blues. Let me know if you had a favorite or if you're already using one of them and really love it. I think my favorite out of all of these was actually the Winsor Blue Green shade, and I want to start experimenting and maybe incorporating it into some of my paintings. Feel free to ask any questions and check out the links below if you'd like to purchase any of these paints. Take care and happy painting!